Hello, guys. Welcome back to Get Your Shit Together. I'm your host, Belen Salomon, and today's guest is Dr. Mal Ryan. She is a naturopathic doctor, the founder of Female Collective, and a specialist in women's health. We have an incredible conversation today about stress, anxiety, toxic positivity, and she gives unbelievable, tangible, realistic and approachable tips on how to manage stress. Take out a pen and paper because there's a lot of information in this episode, and I really hope you guys enjoy this. And without further ado, please meet Dr. Mal Ryan. Dr. Mal Ryan, welcome to Get Your Shit Together. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you, my friend.
Me too. Mal and I have been trying to do this for a minute, so I am excited to ask you all the questions and just get to know you a little bit better too.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with, tell me your background, how you got into this field. Tell me all the things.
All the things. So my background, interestingly enough, is in human behavior and psychology. So I was
Oh, great.
always,
Perfect.
yeah, so fascinated. I always wanted to know, and I still do, like how our behaviors shape our lives, how we think shapes our lives. And so that was the field that I was going into. And then I flipped and went into functional medicine as my doctorate, thinking that they were different, thinking that I was changing gears, never really realizing that they're superimposed on top of each other. It's the same kind of thing. How we think, how we see ourselves, how we behave has a massive impact on our physical health. And so that's kind of my thing. That's what's guided my career into understanding how our behaviors, how we see ourselves, and how we think influences our physical bodies in terms of hormones and stress and all that kind of stuff.
Well, there's a lot to unpack with what you just said. Even Fiona's like already having a mental breakdown because I've literally have never looked at it like that, like the human behavior.
Yeah.
And I'd love to like just dive into that. If you can explain a little bit more about like the human behavior and how it's, like you just said, it's all connected.
Yeah.
And I have 97 follow-up questions.
Amazing. Okay. So first of all, we had no idea what we're going to talk about. So we're just going to riff off of it. So I'm just going to go off the top of my head to see
Please.
How can we make an example of this? And Fiona's here too. I love Fiona.
I know. Sorry, she's so like, it's like I hit record and she's like, oh, let me go like freak out in the background, like cry.
I feel like she just likes the camera.
She does.
So one thing that's really easy and usually hits home a little harder is close your eyes for a moment. So close your eyes and picture for a moment walking up to your fridge. And when you walk up to your fridge, there's a bowl of lemons sitting in your fridge.
Okay.
One is already cut in half. Grab the half of a lemon and lick it.
Okay. My mouth is salivating.
Exactly. So my point is that the mind is a closed container. It has no information except what you give it.
Listen, we're 1 minute in and I'm shook.
So my point, so when I work with women in the stress response is that society tends to super obsess about circumstance. Mm-hmm. So when we're in a situation that's causing us stress, all we want to do is fix the situation and then we allow ourselves to feel less stress. So I'm going to fix this. Also, a sense of control is really calming. So I'm going to exert my control. I'm going to fix this and then I'm going to allow myself to feel better. Not realizing that our perception of stress is blind. We give it meaning. So the circumstances that we experience, we attach meaning to it and we respond to the meaning. We don't respond to the circumstance. And so when you do simple tasks like that, when you lick a lemon and your body salivates, or when you walk in a room that you've felt anxiety before and your heart starts to race, it's not there's something wrong with you. It's how we're designed to operate. The input that we're giving, the meaning that we're attaching to our circumstance and our lives is what our nervous system is responding to versus the situation.
So I know we talked last year, and I
Yeah.
kind of gave you a little bit about like what's going on with me, which, spoiler alert, it's the same shit still going on.
Yeah.
But I'm a very like I'm a high functioning person with anxiety and stress and controlling. I'm just really calm is what I'm trying to say. But
Yeah.
so for me, I'm in a constant state of fight or flight. Like I have been this way since I was a small child, all up into clearly my adulthood. So for me, it's like I hold on to negative information more than like rationality, more than positive. It's just like it's how I operate, and
Yeah.
and I don't know how to undo that because it's this conditioning. And like you said, with society, especially for women, I feel like it's in our nature to want to, okay, I'll take care of that. I'll do this. I'll do
Yeah.
that. And it's like, because of that, the result is burnout and then exhaustion and fatigue and lack of motivation, depression, which are all these symptoms I suffer from. And I know so many women do, so many of my girlfriends do. And, you know, listening to you just say like so much of it is what we're telling ourselves. It's enlightening, but it's also like enraging for myself because
Yeah.
I know this. Like I know this, and it's like I try to practice this by telling myself what, like it's the narrative I'm telling myself when I know like the reality is something else. So
Yeah.
can we talk a little bit about that and how somebody, like not somebody, how we can control those invasive thoughts and like how to manage them?
Yeah. I totally hear you. And the truth about your experience is that everything that you're experiencing, the patterns that you're experiencing, you've had to experience them. And the point of me saying that is that you've had to, at some point in your life, be hypervigilant. When there, like you said, like I'm hypervigilant, I like a sense of control. Those are coping strategies that worked, and you've adapted due to something that you've experienced when you were younger. And so, or something that you experienced where those were taken away, where you were praised or rewarded for what you could achieve or what you could do, and therefore it was your access point to validation or whatever that may be. And so your state that you're experiencing right now isn't to be invalidated. It actually is one of the strongest coping mechanisms that you've adopted for real reasons. But what you're expressing right now is that that usefulness has expired. You've grown into a different state of your
Totally.
life, and those patterns still show up, even though there's not as much evidence on the outside to warrant them.
Totally. And I like, to your point, I think it was a little bit of both, like childhood, something happened in my childhood where I had to take on that role.
Yeah.
And then also not necessarily like the praise, but like, you know, even when like people will say, wow, like, how do you do that all? Or you have it together. Or like, I'm like, oh, well, it's a superpower where
Right.
I am grateful that I am that way. And I've gotten far in my career and in my life because of the way I am. But I'm also exhausted being in my head and in my body because it's not an enjoyable place to be
No.
when you're constantly on, because I'm always on edge, and my husband could not be more opposite, and we digest things so much differently. But sometimes I feel because he is so laid back, I have to be the one who's in
You
control.
have to
I have to
compensate.
completely. And it was like that also growing up with my older sister. Like she was, you know, in La La Land, and I was the one like, this has to be done. We have to go here, like whatever it was. And as the older I get, and now that I'm in therapy and I'm like learning all these like behaviors that I've had since a little kid, and the conditioning, it's so much work to like undo this little girl that's inside of me almost.
100%. 100%. And the interesting thing about, like I tell women, heavy wear the crown of the capable. Like just give it to someone that can get shit done, and they will just be asked all of these topics. Like you mentioned your sister. And so, yes, as a little girl, when you perceive a threat, when you perceive something has to be done, when you perceive possible punishment, whatever it is, our worlds are very narrow as children. Like our worlds are within the four corners that we can see of the room. That's our world. And so when we extract meaning that it's threatening or dangerous, or we need to figure it out, or we were forced to grow up a little bit fast, or we were praised to say you're an old soul,
Right.
or you're so wise, or you're so mature, that doesn't become a characteristic as much as it becomes an identity.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
so the I wouldn't say it's nothing. First of all, for me, it's nothing's a problem. Everything's a pattern. It's a pattern. And part of that, it's not to invalidate, it's to recognize that it's not inherently who you are. It's how you've learned and your nervous system has learned to move and survive in the world.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
And there's a
No.
threat in the unknown. One of the biggest, Boleyn, I swear to God, I don't know if I can curse on here, but I swear to God.
I mean, all I do is curse.
Yeah, me too. That's why we were friends like this. One of the most unnerving things to the nervous system is the unknown. And so our nervous system will choose what's uncomfortable yet familiar over the
Right.
possible pleasure of the unknown. And so for you, being hypervigilant is a state of known because you're not willing to risk the unknown of not being it.
It's my worst nightmare not knowing. And like, even with the
Exactly.
move to Austin, like that's been the
Yeah.
biggest struggle. It's like, okay, well, when is it over? Or like, when am I like back in California? And like, that was the mental state I was in all last year. Like the unknown is what was unraveling me and killing me. And like my nervous system, I'm always in a state of fear. And like I said, I started therapy and I'm doing, Reiki and cold plunge and cupping and I'm doing all the things, but
Yeah.
it's just, I've been this way for 38 years.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about you saying that, a lot of the things that you mentioned, like sleep or energy or anxiety or depression or control or hypervigilance, it's usually, if the answer isn't simple enough, you're not there yet because everything is such a cohesive unit. And so a lot of the tone of what you speak with is, I'm not safe.
Totally. And that has always kind of been even an issue in my marriage, like especially in the beginning, because it was like, I don't feel safe. And it was like my dad who I felt safe with, and even in high school, like it was the same thing. Like I didn't do sleepovers. I didn't do a lot of things because I just never felt safe. When now, even as a grown adult, I have to remind myself, you're home. Like I am safe. I am my home. I can provide safety and not relying on others for that safety. Like, sure, of course, like I rely on my husband and even my dad for certain things. But at the end of the day, I need to know like I am safe because I have me. But it's a work in progress because there's days where I don't feel like I have myself and I'm leaning on Alejandro or I'm leaning on my parents. And it's humbling.
Yeah, and it's exhausting. I don't think that
Beyond.
people realize how difficult it is to live in a mind that feels like it's against you.
And I try to explain this a lot to my husband, because he's like, what is triggering?
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know how to function. And I'm not, by the way, there's no reason for me not to feel safe, like I'm safe in my environment. And sometimes when I was younger, it was like, what did that mean to me? Was it, having a savings account? Was it having a plan? And it's like, I've always been that way. I've always been the friend that had an evacuation plan, had an earthquake plan, like had all the canned goods. Like literally my best friend always tells me like, if there's an apocalypse, like I need to be with you.
I'm coming.
And
Yeah.
I'm coming. But again, not to keep saying this, it's just, it has burned me out to the point of like my hormones are absolutely shot. My adrenals are shot. My cortisol, every time I get it tested, the first thing they ask me is, do you have a lot of stress? And it's like, I have average like anyone else,
Right.
but it's like, how are you surviving? Because it's like this constantly in my brain, therefore also in my gut, because obviously, it's all connected. And it's just like, it's just the burnout that I'm experiencing right now is just
Another level.
oh yeah.
Yeah. What
So
do you identify? Like, how do you identify? Do you identify with somebody that is anxious? How close is it to you?
like like how I am with my anxiety, I completely identify with it. Like, it's just, I'm nervous all the time. But it's weird because I'll have moments where like a lot of it is my environment, to be honest. Like
Yeah.
if I'm in certain environments, they're triggering or I can feel at ease. But I'm becoming much more self-aware of it. And I project so much. And I like build these imaginary scenarios in my head. And I just go so far off the deep end. And again, it goes back to like the thought pattern that I have. And I think the instantly worst case scenario, there's no gray.
Yeah.
It's immediately bad. Immediately. Like I would go to the doctor for like just my yearly and immediately I was like, I'm dying.
Right.
Like there's no in between. They're going to tell me I have a rare disease, and it's just a constant work in progress. And like, you know, when I meet like new people, they are shocked that I'm like this because I don't know if it's a mask that I have on that I'm like seem like it's all put together. And yes, for the most part it is, but that ties in with the control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that like our identity, so an identity is kind of a rehearsed idea of ourselves. It's what we tell ourselves regularly. Like you have an identity that, like you just mentioned, that you kind of try on when you're in certain situations where it's easy for you to feel comfortable. It's easy for you to do certain things. And then in other situations, you have this way that you relate to yourself that feels quite threatening. It feels like there's a level of comfort in thinking the worst case scenario because there's an ease and a comfort in preparing for the worst because you feel like you have a plan.
Yeah.
And so it's not a coping strategy that is only you. Most people feel very isolated in their experience. They're like, what is wrong with me? What is like, do I have some sort of weird wires crossed? And we spend so much time and energy looking on the outside, trying to figure out like, what's the solution? What's the answer? And I think what it comes down to is we keep a lot of our experiences really close to our heart and to our chest and to our identity. Like you say, like, I am depressed. I am an anxious person. I am hypervigilant. And so it doesn't just it starts with acknowledging your experience. Like 100% that's real. Like the children that are having breakdowns laying on the ground in Walmart, that's very real for them. Like that's really real. The kids that are terrified going into school, the woman that's in a corner having a panic attack, that's not just a faulty nervous system. That's a nervous system that's doing its best under the certain circumstance that they're perceiving in the situation and the conditioning and the patterns that they have. And so it's part of it is acknowledging that it's actually very real. It's not like they're a problem to fix. This is your experience. The second thing I would say is when you catch yourself doing I am, it's I'm experiencing. You're experiencing depression. You're experiencing anxiety. Even though it's frequent, even though it's all the time, it's not who you are. The reason I say that isn't just for a level of comfort, isn't just some sort of voodoo hack. It's because the mind really holds on to I am as an identity. So you could convince someone that the sky is orange if they tell themselves enough, and then they will just take that as actual truth. Your mind just takes things as truth, unedited, unchecked. And so framing things as an experience, I'm experiencing burnout, I'm experiencing exhaustion, I'm experiencing these things. What it does is it gives you a slight bit of space to acknowledge that there's a possibility for something different.
So it's the language that we have to change in a sense of how we speak to ourselves. Because like you just said, if it's saying I'm experiencing versus I have, I'm telling myself that I have something when it's quite fact and experience.
It's absolutely an experience. And even before that is absolute and total, utter, wholehearted, can't stop self-compassion. Because everything that you've experienced to this point in your nervous system is working on overdrive in an ecosystem that feels unsafe.
Yeah.
And your nervous system is doing everything right to protect you because that's its job.
Yeah. I'd love to for you to get in detail because I know hormones is your specialty and what you're very, very passionate about. Can you talk on how, if anyone listening to this can relate to me, how this is impacting their hormones and just in general, how high stress impacts hormones and like just not the consequences, but like
Yeah.
just in a sense, yeah, the consequences and the side effects of this.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest sort of blind spots in our society and the medical system in general, and even sort of the self-education world, is understanding the degree that things are connected. And so, like, when you're really stressed, you just want like sugary, carby food.
Yes.
It's not just because it's a comfort. The reason it's a comfort is that stress hormone is highly, highly connected to insulin. And stress hormone is highly, highly connected to what's called progesterone. And so they don't work in isolation. You don't have hormonal imbalances without having some degree of stress. You don't have issues with blood sugar without having some degree of other hormones being off, because they work so tightly together and so tightly connected. And so what I like to offer for women is not, I have a big pet peeve with like positivity. Like just, it's,
It's literally on my notes. I want to talk about toxic
yeah,
positivity, not to interrupt you, but
yeah,
I want to go there.
yeah. Because I feel like the degree that we can empower women with understanding their patterns is so much more powerful than the degree that we can blame them for being imbalanced and wrong. They're not
Right.
wrong. It's how your body's experiencing is exactly how it would experience something given the genetic, the ecosystem, the nutrition, a lot of the factors in your environment. Your body's responding to certain circumstances. A lot of those things are within your control, and we're never taught the patterns. Like, how many
Sure.
women start their period, or girls, how many girls start their period and they don't even know that it's coming again, or they don't even know what it means, or they don't even know what to do, or they stuff tampons or pads up their sleeves and it's like this big shame. It's
Totally.
we're never really taught about how we operate. And I think I suffered a lot with anxiety. That's why I was so fascinated. I suffered with anxiety. I suffered with a lot of things. And one of the things that was the most freeing to me is to recognize that anyone under the circumstance would experience the same thing.
Right.
It's that we are with the exact same experience, the exact same biochemical operations, like those kinds of things. It's that we're a collection of patterns. Hormones are a pattern. Your nutrition and your blood sugar is a pattern. And rather than feeling like we need to fix something that's broken, i.e., go to all these quick fixes or fad diets or whatever, it's recognizing that we're already whole, but we actually deserve to know what's going on. Like,
Right.
we deserve to understand the pattern for ourselves. Like you mentioned, stress and hormones. So when stress is off, to answer your question, when stress is off, it can impact our blood sugar. And so what happens is that because we're on this degree of high alert, our mind, our brain craves sugar. So we crave more savory foods. There's also a component of that where when you eat a carbohydrate, your serotonin goes up. Who, when they're anxious, doesn't want to hit a serotonin? And
Yeah.
so when we get in these patterns, and then there's also that mental component where we can get down on ourselves and whatever. So there's that vicious cycle. On the other side, stress hormone impacts. With our cycle, there's two main hormones. There's more, but there's two main hormones. There's estrogen, which a lot of us are aware of, which is sort of stronger when we start our cycle. I just simplified to like when we start our cycle, think of estrogen. And then the 2 weeks before our cycle starts, think of progesterone.
Yeah, I have low progesterone and I'm currently on progesterone.
Right. And so progesterone is an anti-anxiety hormone. Progesterone and stress hormones are highly, highly correlated. They usually drop together.
Wow. So what does it mean when you have low progesterone?
What it means when you have low progesterone is that you're more susceptible to PMS, you're more susceptible to mood issues, anxiety, depression, sleep issues, cravings for carbohydrates, headaches, skin issues. So that's
Honestly, listen, check, check,
right,
check, check.
right.
Literally check all the boxes. And like my PMS is so gnarly, Mel. Like it's so insane. And it's, by the way, it's not like for 3 days. I'm
Yeah,
going to say like 11 days, like
yeah,
hard core, and like now that I'm like taking progesterone, I'm seeing like a local doctor here in Texas. Like I do feel a little bit better, but all those things you just said, like I'm like, wow. And the sleep for sure is the worst part personally for me, because I'm usually a really good sleeper, and like it's just 2 a.m. I'm like, oh, should I go like start a project and maybe like
totally
like build a desk from scratch?
Yeah, like anything, like more energy in the more energy at 2 a.m. than when you wake up in the morning.
Yes.
So that's hallmark. That's a consequence of progesterone. So your progesterone levels would be off as a consequence of the nervous system. So what I mean by that is that your nervous system actually doesn't have the juice it needs to produce progesterone as well as it needs to. And
or on its own, because some women are fine, obviously.
Yeah, some women are fine, and genetically there's a factor, but progesterone is super correlated to insulin. It's really, really correlated to stress hormones. And so there is that part of supporting progesterone. There is that part where you boost up progesterone, but you always, that's my thing, it's patterns. Like I love patterns. Like if someone gave me understanding the patterns, if someone gave me like a puzzle, first of all, I hate them. I wouldn't do that. But recognizing where the dots connect, where the dots connect, where's the highest point of impact is my thing. For you, it feels as though it's the nervous system. And your nervous system is, like, for instance, your sleep. If you've ever been around an animal, because animals exhibit the most raw form of the nervous system, like the stress response, just because they're on, they're off, like they don't have that higher cognitive function to sort of just keep it going. If you see an animal that is stressed out, they're not going to sleep.
Right.
And the reason for that being is that it's not safe enough.
Right. Well, Fiona is basically my child, so she's the exact same way as me. So she's always in this wreck.
And it's not even that you can't sleep, it's quality of sleep. It's how deeply can you actually sleep.
100%. It's the quality. It's that, because I'll fall asleep and then like clockwork, and I'm like, oh my God, like, do I wake up, or like, what do I do? And I always just stay in bed, and eventually I fall asleep. But that it's like, just don't be stressed.
Yeah.
Or ask for support. And I'm like, listen, if it was that fucking simple, I wouldn't be in this situation.
100%.
So let's talk about toxic positivity, because it's really fucking annoying. And I'm like, I feel like you have a similar personality to me, where like I go more on the sarcastic, dry, cynical side, and like that, like it gives me idiot shivers with the toxic positivity, which obviously to extent, I never want to come off like a negative hag. I want to be like, positive to an extent, but there's this thing going on, especially with social media, with the toxic positivity. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, toxic positivity is the degree to which you feel as though you're supposed to only feel a certain way. Like you're supposed to only feel a certain range of emotion that feels, it's not even like we attribute meaning to emotion. So like for instance, poets could feel really inspired by sadness, and therefore it's not a bad emotion. It's just a sort of inspiring thing. And so it's not about good and bad emotions. It's just, it is. We have emotions, and therefore they are. Like, it's just, we have emotions. Toxic positivity is when we try and stick with only comfortable emotions: joy, positivity, lightheartedness, comfort, safety, whatever that may be. And so we always try to force ourselves to either shut down or ignore when we're feeling upset, angry, frustrated, whatever it may be, discomforted, embarrassed. We try and shut it down immediately as though it's wrong. So we try and fix it. Good luck. And then we end up putting on a facade because we need to present a certain way. This is often a trauma response. It's often a child that had to present a certain way in order to feel safe, or to feel a sense of love, or to feel accomplished, or to feel validation. And that's another conversation. But social media takes toxic positivity to like the extreme.
The next level. Yeah. It's almost trendy. It's almost trendy,
exactly.
Right? Like,
exactly.
And I feel like every now and then I'll get a message and somebody will be like, wow, thank you so much for like being vulnerable. And I'm like, well, what the fuck am I here for? Like,
100%.
I'm not trying to come off like everything's dandy. Like, I'm
Yeah.
actually like literally will tell the person bagging my groceries my life story, and I'll probably start crying at Whole Foods. Like, I'm like,
Love it. Yeah.
I'm overly like
Yeah.
sharing my emotions. And I'm lucky that I grew up with like in a household that it was okay to express our feelings and like all of that. But I feel like it's so trendy right now to be like, my life is perfect, my husband's perfect, my kids, my jobs, and it's like, give me a fucking break. Like, we're all hanging on by a thread at some point, like, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's just the reality.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what you're saying is like you're just embracing your humanness. Like I feel like social media has become this place, this really edited, curated facade of what your life is on the inside, and it's in so many circumstances so far removed from what it is. But just like I said, our mind is a blind, it's a vat, it's blind.
Right.
And so when you're consuming things, and life is all about reference points, when you're referencing or comparing yourself to something that is completely fake and false and curated, while also implying that you're supposed to have it all together and all smooth every edge and never experience anything, you're going to vilify yourself pretty fucking quick. Like you're going to be the bad guy in your own story by the end of the day, because you just can't operate that way. And so toxic positivity is when you recognize that in order to be a human, you have to express all human emotion. And some of the worst emotions are some of the access points to giving you the tools to experience the best ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and in a way, it's like the way we talk to ourselves is basically triggering what's going on in our body. Because like you just said, I could be watching someone's story and they're in the Maldives and they were, like eating a fucking fruit basket off each other's stomachs. Then I'm telling myself, wow, I'm never going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to go to the Maldives. And it's such a false image that we're seeing, but we're all constantly doing it. Although maybe you agree with it, I do feel a little shift right now. Mm-hmm. And I think people are over that. Like there is definitely a lot of people who are still with the curated and the toxic positivity, but I've been also seeing people like expressing like, there's like a trend going on right now where it's like 5 things I'm struggling with. And it's like, they're just normal struggles that all of us are feeling every single day. Like
100%.
I have days, and I've gotten much better with this, where it's like, I legitimately, Mal, I'm like, I don't want to do anything today. Mm-hmm. Nothing. I want to walk for 4 hours if I feel like it. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to like be social. And when I say be social, like maybe go on stories. Yeah. And where we've there's been the narrative of like, you need to work 9 to 6 all day, every day. You got to do these things. Yeah. So I do think like there is that side of social media where people are kind of being like, it's not normal to be like constantly in a state of bliss or like there's no worries, because it's like the world we're living in right now is fucking exhausting and scary as it is. So, I always try to, be as transparent as possible. And now even with the podcast, like have conversations like the one that we're having now, because I think we have just been swallowing so much shit and misinformation for so long. And so many people are gullible in that sense, especially like the younger generation. And it's just like, I do not want to be part of that at all.
100%. And I think what we often fail to realize is that like perfectionism is a behavioral adaptation to believing that there's something wrong with us. Mm-hmm. And when we start to open our eyes and say that there's nothing wrong with us, we're just human. You don't have to be perfect. You can loosen the reins on having it all perfect. Yeah. And it doesn't start with sharing it on your news feed. It starts with you actually sort of acknowledging like, no, I'm allowed to be fucking mad. Like I'm allowed to get upset. And if I do someone wrong, I'll apologize, but I'm allowed to experience the whole range of emotion. Right. And one of the best things we can learn as adults is emotional regulation. But at the same time, that doesn't mean just shut them down. it means to more so understand them, not just avoid them. So if you're
Right.
upset, one of the fastest ways to calm the mind when they're upset with something is to label it. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling angry. Because when we usually feel something, what we do is we attach it to something that we're thinking about. So, for instance, if you wake up and you're feeling really sad, um, you start to think about things that make you sad, or whatever you're thinking about is making you sad, and so your thoughts. And so our mind attaches its attention to what you're thinking about. If you actually stop and just say, I'm sad, what you're doing is you're identifying it. And the mind loves a sense of identification. The mind loves, it will spin and spin and spin just to try and predict what's going to happen, to try and protect you. When you tell it what's happening, it stops to some degree. It just washes over. You're like, I'm sad. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because the mind, just like we do, we try and fix things. We want to fix, we want to protect, we want to make it all go away. And so when you start to say, I'm sad, and that's okay, it gives you that degree of like, okay, I'm allowed to be sad, I'm allowed to be upset, and it's okay. And your mind is like, okay, what now?
It goes back to like the dialogue we're having with ourselves and the conversations we're having with ourselves and then the thought patterns. So I'd love for you, I have two questions.
Yeah.
Not, well, yeah, they're questions. So one, I'd love like for you to give some tips, some tangible tips on stress management, realistic ones. Like, you know, like you can tell me, oh, go for a stroll for 4, like when
Yeah.
someone is like fully having a panic attack or they're fully projecting and you feel like your cortisol rising, like what are some tangible tips that you can give us that like, you know, can bring you back to earth in a couple minutes?
Okay. So that's a really good question, by the way. I would say, in terms of like you mentioned, a lot of it is about safety for you. And so you'll say things like, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. That doesn't mean a ton because it's still from it's still from you. It's still from your experience. It doesn't mean a lot. It's just like when someone says like, think positively. It doesn't, or like just say affirmations. Like just say like, I am this, even if they don't believe it, it means nothing. And they could be speaking Hebrew for all their brain cares. It's just, it doesn't stick. The fastest way when you're in a stress state. So panic is a different thing. I'll give you a different strategy. Panic is like a wave. You're not stopping that freight train. But we have a couple strategies that can shorten the freight train. So with stress, you're feeling that wave, you're feeling that anxiety, your mind is racing. Instead of saying things like, I'm safe, or it's okay, or everything's fine, or smarten up, or like, why the fuck, like getting upset with yourself, ask yourself. So that comes down to the limbic system. So like our really rudimentary, emotionally driven survival system is activated, the base of the brain. One way to turn on your frontal lobe is, rather than saying, I am safe, say, is it true? Is it true that, and not in you're not allowed to answer in elaborate answers, yes or no answers. Is it true that I'm not safe? No. And what it means is that it turns on the rational part of your brain to engage in the conversation rather than the emotional part that's trying to speak up for itself in emotion. So very, very, very short yes, no answers, close-ended. Is it true that? Is it true that this? And so, like, for instance, going to the doctor, is it true that I've been diagnosed with a rare condition? No. Is it true that it's likely that's going to happen? No. And so what you can do is you can actually turn on a part of your brain that has the ability to turn off the limbic system rather than try and fight and claw your way out of the limbic system.
Right. And it's
Right.
so simple. Like,
That's what I
is it
mean.
true? Yeah,
Is
no,
it,
I mean,
if it's not simple, you're not there yet. You're really
right.
not.
And I have never asked myself that question. Is it true?
Is it
Like,
true?
yeah, like as simple, like, you know, like let's say I feel a friend is ignoring me, and then you
Yeah.
spiral. And it's like,
Yeah.
I just need to ask myself, is that true? And it's so,
Exactly.
it's literally like mind blowing because, and by the way, no one teaches us this, right?
No one.
Like you just said, it's like, be positive, like
Totally.
and
Yeah.
it's like also, to an extent, I with words of affirmation, I think those can be super powerful, and
Me
I think
too.
those can be, even in an episode I did, I think a couple weeks ago, like even looking at yourself in the mirror and even saying, is that true? Or like even like
Absolutely.
doing the words of affirmation, I think it can be so powerful, but ultimately it's raw asking yourself, is that true? And I'm going to basically start leading my life with that because I would say 99% of the things that I'm feeling is not true. It's just
Right.
thoughts, invasive fucking thoughts that I have.
Right.
And what are your thoughts on like journaling and brain dumping and writing it out?
I love it. So any means of sort of getting it out of your system. Um, I think there's a difference between writing it out to get it out. If you write it out and it feels like you sort of get it out and therefore you process, I think that that's so healthy. That's so important. I love that idea. If it's a form of expression, it's a form of self-understanding. You can go back, see patterns. I think that it's really, really, really valuable. I think that if you're revisiting painful stories and situations and experiences over and over again in a journal, I think that that can be,
Triggering.
you can reinforce the pattern. So the mind only cares what you give attention to. That's it.
It's
Like
so true.
the society lives with currency of money, the mind lives with currency of energy and attention. That's it. That's it. It only cares what you give attention to. That's why when you get a certain vehicle, that's the only vehicle that everyone now apparently owns because you now see it everywhere.
Right. Which like exactly like, oh, I keep seeing like red cars and then all
Yeah,
you're seeing is red cars. And it's like, you fixate. And this can also be like, I'll have an argument with my husband and it's like, I fixate on something. He literally would be like, that was 5 days ago. Why are you still fixating on that? And I'm like,
yeah,
because it's right here.
right,
It's still there. Like,
right. And I think that's why your mind like soaks up the deliciousness of is it true? Is because the human mind, not your mind, the human mind operates off of story. Like when you used to have to study for school and you made rhymes or stories, you remember them. If someone tells you a story, you could rehearse it back and tell someone else. If someone tells you just rote facts or whatever. So we gather bits of information from our environment and then our mind will create a puzzle and a story that attaches to it. It's the same reason why we can often finish other people's sentences because our mind's already anticipating what they're going to say. And so is it true? What it does is it halts the story. It stops it from allowing, which is why it has to be a yes or no answer. It stops it
right.
from elaborating because the meaning that we attribute everything to is what we're responding to. And so when we don't allow it to attach meaning anymore, or we have the capacity to give some space and reframe the meaning, all of a sudden we don't have the same response. Panic is a little bit different. Like you mentioned panic. Panic is tricky. So panic is usually like that really overwhelming nervous response that comes over us. It's sort of this trauma response. It can come out of nowhere. People can have panic out of nowhere, where seemingly they've been quote unquote fine their whole life and all of a sudden they feel panic. One of my fastest tips and strategies that I find that works with patients is to picture something mundane that you're doing later. It sounds so fucked up. So say you're on a flight. Let's talk about your
Okay.
flight.
Yeah.
You don't like flying. You get in the flight, you're sitting down, the buckle, everything about the flight, the smell, the noise, the beeper, everything is triggering because your
Yeah.
nervous system is like, we've been here before, we panicked here, get ready to go, we're about to panic. What you can do is close your eyes, picture the hotel that you're going to, walking through the front door, checking in, grabbing your bags, walking in. Picture something so mundane that you're doing later that has almost no meaning. What it does is it tells your mind that you've already survived if you're picturing what you're doing after it.
Wow. I used to be a horrible flyer, by the way, like horrible flyer. Now I'm like, listen, if
Yeah,
anything
just
happens,
take me.
just take
Yeah.
me. But that is, I think that task of thinking of the mundane is so difficult when you're
Yeah, so
in
difficult.
the thick of that, because you can't rationalize like
No.
with yourself or somebody rationalize with you. And I've only had one gnarly panic attack, and it was actually at an airport. And I've flown my whole life, and like very, very lucky that I've been was able to travel so much. And I was actually supposed to go visit Alejandro. We had been
Yeah.
dating for not that very long, and my sister had dropped me off at LAX, and I literally, like, the entire room was spinning. The people at the out of Mexico had to contact my sister, and they were like, "Is this your first flight?" And I was like, "No," but like there was just
Yeah.
no rationality. Like Alejandro was
Yeah.
like, "Nothing's gonna happen." I was like, "This plane is going to blow up. I know this
Totally.
for a fact." Which
Totally.
it
And
didn't.
it feels like total truth. That's what I mean.
Yes, if I
And
would have
that's
known, if
why
I would have asked myself that question, I probably would have gone.
and that's the thing is that I feel like people don't realize with individuals with anxiety, especially when there's individuals where one is really relaxed and the other one's not, is that you're not irrational. You're responding exactly how you're supposed to respond to what your mind is telling you.
Right.
Like,
So go ahead. Go ahead.
no, you go.
I was going to say, what can we do when someone is in a state like that?
So when
Like,
someone
aside from
is
asking
in, yeah,
ourselves the truth question.
yeah, I would say so. So in the moment, anxiousness, is it true, is a really good one. Is it true? Yes or no? Um, Panic is trickier. Panic is one of the things that panic does feel like an impending doom, like something is inherently wrong and something is going to go wrong. Panic is to the degree that you can kind of just embrace it and know that it's going to pass. It's temporary. So this is temporary. This is like it's not trying to fix it or push against it. This is temporary. If you can picture a door that you're going to walk through later, like something where it gives your mind something to hold on to, nothing to fix, everything to just let go on. I used to have seizures as a kid, and so I remember just feeling so anxious and wired. And it's a really long story, but my aunt passed away really young at 20 years old when she was dancing. They had no idea what happened to
Sorry.
her, except that she had, I never met her, except that she had seizures when she was a kid. I was 5 years
Okay.
old. I started having seizures. They didn't know where they were coming from. Everyone thought that I had an expiry date. But I remember this one doctor, they did a ton of testing. This one doctor, I remember really panicked at every like I'd have a panic attack every time I'd have a seizure. This one doctor, female, knelt down and she said, I want you to remember that every single one will pass. And it's not about how you feel, it's how you respond. And it was like this light bulb went off, and all of a sudden it was almost like floating in a wave. It's just sort of this state of letting go. And there's a theme and there's a thread amongst individuals' lives where that state of starting to let go of the reins and let go to some degree is not just with their panic.
Right.
There's a common thread there. So that's one thing where it's like the degree that you can embrace and self-trust that it's going to pass and just sort of roll with it. You don't have to fight it. You don't have to fix it. You just roll with it for the moment. You sort of sink into it. If you have the capacity at the end to embrace something that's mundane and neutral and whatever later on, that can help. Breathing. I know everyone talks about breathing, but I don't talk about the mechanisms of breathing. Inhaling. So someone that's in a state of panic or anxiety, telling them to take deep breaths is horrible. The reason is because we often feel this sense of tightness and constriction when we're feeling panicked or stressed or anxious. Like it just feels like everything is sort of in a vice. Our inhale triggers the stress response. So what do you do when you jump in a pool to survive? Our
Right.
inhale, we often hold our breath when we're feeling nervous.
Yeah.
Exhale, that's one thing that you can recognize. You don't have to fix the anxiety. You can just notice when you're not breathing. That's it. It's letting go of that there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, and seeing it as a pattern, like, oh, I'm not breathing. No wonder I'm feeling a little bit more anxious. And just exhaling. You can do it anywhere. Just prolonging the exhale twice as long. What you're doing is you're physically triggering the nervous system that it's safe. When you
Right.
can't mentally trigger it, you can physically trigger it that it's safe.
Yeah, I have had times where I'm like, are you breathing?
A hundred
Like,
percent.
and it's like my body language too. And I'm so uptight and I'm so like, the grip is so fucking tight. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm just now chipping away at loosening that grip.
Yeah.
And, you know, for so long, I've always been so envious of people who are just like, you know, like this,
Right.
going with the
Yeah.
flow. And I'm just like, what is that like? What is that like? And I'm, you know, 1% there, but slowly that's like the goal. And just, you know, quieting the mind, I think is, you know, very, very challenging. And hopefully the way to, like, with these, you know, suggestions and tips that you've given us with like the asking yourself if this is true, and this, the breathing, and just trying to like visualize, like you said, like a mundane task. I'm literally going to try. I'm not going to try. I'm going to do all of these like
Yeah.
practices that you just suggested, because one, they're all free.
100%. 100%. And here's the thing,
And
Belinda, before I forget, you're never going to be that person. And that's okay. You're
yeah,
never going to be the go with the flow person. And I think part of the problem is that you're trying to be.
yeah,
And because when we try so hard to be something, what we're inherently saying is that there's something wrong with who we are.
yeah,
And it's not like you have to fix your mind, it's you can optimize it.
right.
Like you're
I,
not anxious, you're detail oriented.
right. It's my superpower.
That's what I mean. It actually is a superpower. Like someone would
Yeah,
say, like someone the other day was telling me they're perfectionists. I was like, you have high standards, but you're also
yeah,
human. So like it's like how you can reorganize not just how you speak to yourself, but how you relate to yourself is so important. We tend to idolize what we assume is so easy breezy. And we also tend to sort of feel anxious around people that are like that because we have to compensate.
totally.
Which is why probably Alejandro's pretty triggering for you when he's like, just don't worry about it. It's
Oh,
like
if
nails on a chalkboard.
spend an hour with the man. Like literally, it's like we could not be more opposite. And I totally agree. I'm never going to be that person, but I do aspire to just be a little bit more like, not like,
100%.
because it's just it's exhausting, and it's
100%.
and it's taxing also on my relationships with others, you know. And
100%.
the older I get, I definitely give like less fucks too, you know, and just
Yeah.
like, I'm like, okay, well, that is the one thing with getting older. But yeah, I'm never going to be like the carefree person. And to be honest, but I don't really have an interest in being that person, because
Yeah, I was gonna say you'd hate it. Yeah.
I do like that I am reliable and resourceful, and like I'm almost like, I don't know, we don't have kids, but I'm very like maternal in that
Yeah.
sense, you know. And
Yeah.
it's just about loosening it a little bit so I can be more present and enjoy things, because
Totally.
I'm always thinking ahead and I'm always anticipating
Yeah.
a disaster of
Yeah.
some sort.
Exactly.
That,
And that you're right. You don't have to suffer through that forever. Like there's a state of you being optimized that's probably pretty high performer just because of your inherent abilities and capabilities. Like you're a high performer. You're a high performer with the nervous system dialed all the way up right now. And
yeah,
so the only person that suffers is you.
100%. And I'm sure you know who Dr. Amen is, right? Daniel
Yeah.
Amen. So I was listening to a podcast with him this morning, actually, and he just wrote another book, and it's all about the different personalities. And I think I haven't read the book. I'm dying to, but one of them is
Yeah.
persistent. And I just from what he said, I'm like, that's me. Like the way I digest, and it's like also accepting that about ourselves. Like there's 7 different types of personalities. I don't know if it was personalities or brain types, and it's
Yeah.
like I am, like you said, like that is me. It's a quality that I do really like in myself, but also don't like when
Yeah.
when it boils down to the control and not being able to just like have fun. And I know that sounds so ridiculous, but like I don't know sometimes, like even to just enjoy myself because I'm thinking, oh, well, this has to be that, and that has to be it. Did I turn on the lights? What if this happens?
Yeah.
What if a fire happens? Like, I gotta ask myself, is it true?
Yeah, right. And that's it. And it's those little tiny hacks. And I swear, and I know it seems so surface and untrue, but it's the simplest little adjustments. Like I tell people, like 3 degrees and a change of ship gets you in a different country. Like it's those
Right.
simple, consistent adjustments that all of a sudden you land in a place where you feel like this feels more like home. In
Yeah.
the confines of my skin, it feels more like home.
Yeah. Honestly, I really like, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. Like these tips are like honestly life changing. So we didn't get to touch base on Female Collective, but I want you to tell us a little bit about that because I want people to know how they can work with you
Yeah.
and, like reach you and, you can help them.
Yes. So interestingly enough, so the Female Collective is a group of, it's an online platform that I have a bunch of free videos, and it's free. I made it free a while ago, where any woman can go on and access it and join the group and learn about these different patterns and hormones. But over the last year and a half, I've been working on a platform specific for female entrepreneurs. The reason being is because female entrepreneurs struggle with mental health issues 3 times more than the average population.
Wow.
So someone asked me, I had a conversation about a year and a half ago, and then it prompted me to go down this rabbit hole of information, and it's unbelievable.
That's
The rate of
insane.
anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, digestive issues, it's even much more than that of a male entrepreneur.
Of course.
And
I mean, of
so,
course.
of course it is. And so my thing is, so the last year and a half, I've been working with female entrepreneurs and understanding how do we optimize you physically, yet, and understand your patterns of how you work, almost like understand your own blueprint so that you can do what you want to do. One of the biggest issues with ambitious women is that they stop themselves because they burn out. They physically can't go any further. It's not that
Right.
they're mentally tenacious, they have a lot of dreams, they have a lot of ambitions, but they physically can't do what their mind is telling them they have to do or they want to do. And so the Female Collective is a group of women, and anyone can join. The videos will always stay there. And then more recently, I'm working specifically with female entrepreneurs. I'm rolling out a one-on-one program for 3 months. We do this crazy deep dive, physical assessments. It's not all psychology. I'm obsessed with what's physically going on. How do we superimpose that over what's mentally going on and patterns? And then a group program and then courses and such. But just enlightening women. This is how it works. Not this
Yeah.
is you're broken and fix it. This is how your patterns work. This is the tool belt I wish we all were given at the age of 13. But it's been long enough that here it is now.
Well, I'm
Because
going to join all the groups. So expect me to
I'll
be,
text you. Yeah, all the groups.
I'll be a part of all the groups. So I always like to end the podcast with asking my guests, what does it mean to them to have their shit together? And it can literally be anything as to, a simple cup of coffee. So for you, although I definitely feel like you're very calm and you probably don't have progesterone issues like me, but what does it mean to you to have your shit together?
I feel like what I feel is when I have my shit together is when I'm able to adapt.
I love
That
that.
is when I feel like I have my shit together, when I am open to things being different than what I expect them to be, and I can adapt.
Once again, I'm going to be taking your advice because I'm not adaptable to many things. So I love that answer. And where can everyone find you? Pimp yourself out. Give us the deets.
So I'm on social media, Dr. Mallory. And then from there, we'll be rolling out all the Revere Co stuff and the female entrepreneurs, and Female Collective is for access point to the free group with a lot of information and videos and all that sort of stuff. I did it during the pandemic as sort of something to do, and women really gravitated towards understanding more.
Amazing. You're wonderful. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was honestly so insightful and you're fucking rad.
Oh, thank you so much, Belen. You're like in terms of interviews, one, you have an amazing interview skill, but your level of vulnerability and rawness is healing. It's not
Thank
just,
you.
it's amazing. So thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Fiona,
Thank you.
too.
I know. Yeah. And I need to come to Canada.
Yes.
I'm coming. I'm coming
Come
with my
on
sweaters
already.
and my turtlenecks, and we're going to drink
Yes.
cocoa and we're going to do all the things.
Yes. We'll go play in the snow.
Deal. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.